today. He walks with me and talks with me along life's narrow way. He lives, salvation to impart. You ask me how I know He lives. He lives within my heart. Would you give Pastor Cindy a hand? The mistakes were all me, not her. I'll take all of that. Just a word of welcome and a prayer, opening prayer before we get started. Right out in this little foyer, there are some little bottles of water and some coffee if you need that. And then, of course, the restrooms are this way down the hall. I know we have some visitors here tonight, and so if you're needing some help, just kind of ask someone. We'll be glad to direct you in the right direction. And I just welcome you here. I'll introduce Reverend Ryan Barnett in a moment, but let's begin with the word of prayer. Gracious Heavenly Father, we know you live within our heart. And so we sing of your glory, we sing of your grace, and we just continue to pray for First Methodist and that your glory would be upon us and that we would be your people and that we would know that you are our God. Be in every word that's spoken tonight. Be in our conversation and in our questions. Be in our hearts and be in our time of deep discernment and prayer. We ask all of this in the mighty and strong name of Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. So we're going to turn it over and begin the program that's the steering committee is putting on tonight, and our speaker is from the Global Methodist Church, but no stranger to me. Reverend Ryan Barnett is going to come. He's currently at First Methodist in Waco, Global Methodist Church, and he's a leader in the new Global Methodist Church. But I've known Ryan, we were just kind of glancing over the years, about 25 years. Before that, he even worked for one of my other good colleagues in ministry, Reverend Sue White, for a little bit. And then I was a dean of a high school conference camp, and Ryan was, through Rusty Freeman's ministries, conference ministries, Ryan, I came to know him as a conference evangelist, and just know that there were many in the 90s and early 2000s, many through his preaching, many young people who gave their hearts to Jesus and actually entered into the ministry out of that calling. And then he came to Junction and he did a revival, and then he and I served on the a board of ordained ministry together, and just had until he moved to Waco, and we just had a great experience. And even once upon a time, he and I spent 2 hours in a bishop's office trying to convince him that we didn't need to go down this road that 10 years later we're on. We made no progress that day, but it was a good camaraderie. So I just want to turn it over to Reverend Ryan Barnett. Would you please welcome him as he comes to lead us?
Thank you, Scott. Thanks, buddy. Well, first of all, I'm so grateful that you clap at the beginning. And also for whoever assembled the lovely gift, thank you. And again, I'm glad you gave it to me at the beginning, just in case. So I always think that's ambitious to give the gift before you hear what the person has to say, but I'm grateful. And I'm grateful to be out here and with you in San Angelo and back home in the Rio, Texas, or Southwest Texas Conference. It's good to be here with my friend Scott. He's already mentioned the longevity of our friendship, but the longevity does not reveal the depth of admiration that I have for him and the investment that he has made in my life, and watching as he has led churches, as he has grown them everywhere he has gone, I know that you have a good pastor at this church who loves you very, very much. And I also know from our conversations in the beginning of some of the changes that are happening in the Methodist world, I know how he has grieved and struggled, knowing that there are people in different places in his congregation and loving them all. That's who your pastor is, and I know you know that. And so this is not an easy thing for him. Believe it or not, they did not teach church split in seminary. That was not one of the required courses. So pastors have largely had to figure things out on their own, on the fly, in incredibly tense and pressure-filled moments. And I know your pastor has done a great job at that simply because I know who he is. And so, Scott, thank you for inviting me to come. And I will say, the words that I share here are my own. Scott has never heard me give this particular presentation, though I have given it many places. Am I still on? Well, I am here. The battery's dead. That seems ominous. Usually it's later on in the talk that you turn the power off. Maybe I can use just one of the headphones. Or I can use the preacher voice. It's just been a lot this week. But while they work on that,
Testing.
great deal. Thank you. So maybe without any further preface, thank you for having me. I am the lead pastor at First Methodist in Waco, which has recently become a global Methodist church. My church voted last August by about 90% of the membership to disaffiliate from the United Methodist Church and move into the Global Methodist Church. I currently am serving as the executive director for the Mid-Texas Annual Conference of the Global Methodist Church, which covers the area of San Angelo. It actually stretches from the Red River to the Rio Grande. We are kind of a big center stripe in the middle of Texas. We've been working with churches in the North Texas Annual Conference, the Rio Texas Annual Conference, of course, the Central Texas Conference where we're located. I also serve as the chair of the Board of Advocates of the newly founded Wesley House of Studies at Truett Seminary, embedded at Baylor University, which is now one of the largest by enrollment Methodist training institutions in the country. We have over 50 Methodist students enrolled, and we have 50 more on application to start in the fall, and so we'll have 100 Methodist students at Truett and at Baylor preparing for ministry in the Global Methodist Church. Those are some of the things that occupy my time. I'm married to Kim. She is a physician's assistant practicing neurosurgery at Providence Hospital. So yes, I am married to a brain surgeon, which makes me careful about what I do and say. The delight of my life is my 7-year-old son, Davis, who is ever before me in my thoughts and decisions that I make as I work through establishing and building a new expression of Methodism that my son will inhabit and in which one day he will raise his children. And so I am very careful and thoughtful about what we do and the legacy we leave for purely selfish reasons, but knowing that he's not the only child who will come into faith in this new expression of the church. Some of what I share with you tonight will be old news, things you've heard and known, and some of it will be completely new to you, and some of the things that's old to you will be new to the people around you. And at times, as I'm sharing, what you may think you're hearing is a recruitment speech for the Global Methodist Church. And so I like to preface by saying it's not. In the Global Methodist Church, we're not trying to recruit anyone because we want people who are of like mind and heart with common mission to band together for this next season, this next Methodism. And so it sounds like a recruitment speech because I'm a passionate guy and I'm excited about what God's doing and I believe in what I'm doing and what He's called me to do. And so I get excited and it sounds like I'm saying this is, what everybody should be doing. I want you to know I'm not trying to recruit you in. I am presenting to you what I'm excited and passionate about, what I see God doing in this particular stream of Methodism. And if you get excited about it and your congregation is excited about it, then come with us. And if not, don't. Truly. The Global Methodist Church's ethos is very different than the one that I inhabited in the United Methodist Church. It is a coalition of the willing, of the people who are moving in the same direction, who have the same heart for the world and for the Lord, and have common values and vision and direction and sense of calling for what God is wanting us to do. I would invite you, as much as possible, to hear what I share in all of these sessions that you do, and then try not to react too much immediately, but to go and set it all before the Lord and pray. I told my people as we were going through this at my church, try not to stop in the parking lot and can you believe that? But instead, put it before the Lord and say, Lord, can we believe that? Lord, what is the truth in all of this? And help me, give me vision and discernment, because He knows better than the person you would call on the phone on the way home or the person that you would stop in the parking lot. He really does. Speaking of prayer and inviting Him, if it's all right, I might do that now. Heavenly Father, I give you thanks for the opportunity to be here this evening with the folks of First Methodist San Angelo and other visitors who have come to hear. I pray, Lord, that your voice would be heard. Lord, that you would give space and room in people's minds and hearts to listen, to discern, and Lord, to prepare themselves to speak on behalf of this congregation as to how they perceive you moving and you directing. And I pray, Lord, that as they feel the weight of not only representing what it is you're saying for them, they might also feel the weight of successive generations of children and grandchildren who are not yet running around the halls of this building, but one day will be. And to listen to your voice of what it might be you want for those kids as they gather, as generations have gathered here since 1882. Lord, I pray your blessing on our time together. I pray that I'm able to provide helpful information. Lord, and that which isn't of you, I pray that everyone in here would easily set it aside. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen. I'm going to plug this back in because my mouth doesn't work as well when my hand is tied up. I heard it. All right. Let's start with this question. How did we get here? Oh, Scott, is it possible that we could pass these out? I have a little sheet that helps you follow along. I'll tell you if there's just a little outline on the front that has some dates and stuff so you don't feel like you have to remember it all. And on the back, there's a little chart. And if you will do me a favor and wait on the chart until we get there, you'll be happier and we'll all be able to pay attention to the same thing at once. So those are just going to come around. And as they are, again, just be on the timeline side, just the little outline side, and you'll be able to follow along the presentation. I'll tell you when we're going to flip over and walk through the other side. How did we get here? That's a question that is a good place to often begin. And the answer to that starts in 1738. In 1738, John Wesley's heart was strangely warmed as he attended Bible studies at Aldersgate. In 1784, the Methodist Episcopal Church launched. Now, don't worry, I'm not going to go year by year after this, but I think it's important for us to remember the origin, the root, and the history of this common stream of the Wesleyan faith that you and I share. 1738, Wesley's heart strangely warmed. 1784, the Methodist Episcopal Church starts. In 1845, in the United States, the Methodist Episcopal Church South broke from the Methodist Episcopal Church. And the reason I mention that is this church formed in 1882 as First Methodist Episcopal Church South. In 1939, this church joined the Methodist Church. That was the joining together of the Methodist Episcopal Church South and the Methodist Protestant Church. And then in 1968, the United Methodist Church formed. And so by that point, and by this point in your own history, if you're keeping count, this church has been a part of 3 different Methodist denominations during its history and lifetime. So in 1968, the United Methodist Church forms as an experiment in religious pluralism. We'll talk more about this, but you no doubt have heard that United Methodism is the Big Tent denomination. It was formed that way intentionally with the merger of multiple Methodist Wesleyan streams with the question, could we create a tent big enough that we could hold competing and differing views on multiple subjects all within one denomination? In 1972, at the very first general conference that followed the formation of the United Methodist Church, language was added into the governing book of the United Methodist Church called the Book of Discipline that has been debated and fought over every 4 years since. So pay attention. The church started in 1968, and by 1972, the issue of human sexuality was already being so hotly debated that they felt they needed to add language into the Book of Discipline to deal with a uniform statement about how the denomination would handle it. The language that they added in 1972 said, all people are of sacred worth, period, full stop. That part never been debated. And then it said, the practice of homosexuality is incompatible with Christian teaching. This is the part that has been debated every 4 years since the denomination began. And every 4 years that it was debated since the denomination has began, the majority of the denomination represented at General Conference has held that language in place as normative for the thought and practice of all United Methodists. However, as years rolled by, those debates became more contentious, and they moved from simply being debates at microphones to including protests and including demonstrations and witnesses that became increasingly disruptive. In 2008, at General Conference in Fort Worth, a group of protesters who were committed to changing that language in the Book of Discipline came onto the floor of General Conference, disrupted and stopped the proceedings, surrounded the altar, and in the process, a communion chalice that had been prepared for the use of the body was tipped over and broken. A fairly prophetic sign of what was happening inside our beloved denomination. In 2012 in Tampa, Florida, General Conference again assembled, and this debate would come to a head. There were actually 2 incredibly significant events that took place in 2012 that I want to mention to you. One has nothing to do with human sexuality. In 2012 at General Conference in Tampa, Florida, delegates assembled knowing that the bureaucracy of the United Methodist Church had grown out of control and was too large to sustain over the long haul, that the increasing cost of maintaining a denomination would become overbearing on a shrinking U.S. population of United Methodists. And so delegates across all kinds of political, social stripes came together and passed a comprehensive reform bill to reform the bureaucracy of the United Methodist Church. It had some sweeping and dramatic changes that they were able to pass, including the elimination of what's called guaranteed appointment. Guaranteed appointment is something that is given to elders in full standing in the conference to which they are appointed. Think of it as tenure for college professors. Guaranteed appointment means that every elder is guaranteed a full-time appointment at a minimum rate of salary and benefit, almost no matter what. Except for a major breach of ethics, that is essentially irrevocable in the United Methodist Church. General Conference 10 years ago did away with guaranteed appointment because the system had become unsustainable as we had shrinking numbers of appointments to which to put pastors, and there's only so many multi-point charges you can assign to one person to collect a full-time salary. In other words, increasingly, church's entire budget was going to try to pay for just being able to maintain the number of elders that we had. They also began to do away with general agencies of the general church. The United Methodist Church, 13 general agencies, all with buildings, with staff, with overhead. They began to collapse those agencies into less numbers of agencies to try to begin to reduce the overhead drag of the denomination. Along with other sweeping reformation, that plan that was pithily titled Plan UMC, each stood for something that I can no longer remember, passed through General Conference, and then on the last day, at the last hour of General Conference, the Judicial Council, which is the highest ranking judicial arm of the United Methodist Church, sent word back to the conference that the plan that they had passed was being vacated and invalidated because the Constitution of the United Methodist Church did not allow for some of the changes they were trying to make in the way that they made them. Let that sink in just for a second. 10 years ago, the United Methodist Church was aware that we could no longer do business as usual. Not for reasons of politics or human sexuality or anything else, but simply for financial reasons, for institutional reasons. And they passed a comprehensive sweeping package to try to reform their bureaucracy so that the church would not necessarily continue its decline. And the institution said, you cannot do that. The bureaucracy said, you cannot reform yourself, even if it means giving the denomination an opportunity to live a longer life. The second thing that happened did once again revolve around this debate about human sexuality. Once again, the language was hotly debated, and it was again defeated. And the traditional language that's in the discipline was set to remain. This time, there was even a suggestion that we should add a line in the discipline that said, look, this is our position, but we have people who disagree with it. Even that was defeated. That, nope, we're going to be of one mind on this, just like we are of everything else, at least in our official documents. Now, what was significant about that was people who follow these things and count knew that General Conference in 2012 would represent the largest number of progressive or more liberal-leaning delegates on human sexuality that the General Conference would likely to have over the next 30 to 40 years, because the church in America is shrinking, and the church in the developing world is growing at a rapid clip, and representation to the General Conference is given out proportionally based on population. In other words, what was understood was overseas delegates to General Conference, primarily in Africa, were going to continue to steadily increase, and they tend to vote more traditional or conservative, however you want to use that language. And so the best opportunity to change that language was at 2012, and it failed. And so the group of leaders for whom this is a holy cause, a matter of deepest sense of justice, profound conviction that we should be practicing same-sex marriages, that we should be ordaining self-avowed practicing homosexuals, they got together, they held a press conference. It included bishops, superintendents, pastors, lay people alike, and they announced together in 2012 what they called a campaign of ecclesial disobedience. What they suggested was that we would not ever be able to get a vote to overturn the denomination's official position. And so the only option left to us would be to engage what they titled, quote, a campaign of disruption and disobedience. Their thought was, if we simply disrupt and disobey on a systemic level in as many places as we can, we will overwhelm the system and force the system to finally have to give up fighting. The metaphor that they used was an image of a big rock with water dripping on it, which, of course, you know, a single drop of water is not going to crack a rock, but if you keep dripping in the same place long enough, the rock is eventually going to split. That was 10 years ago, and that campaign of disruption and disobedience has been ongoing for over a decade now, and the rock has now split. They were not wrong in their assessment of the political strategy that they sought to deploy 11 years ago. The problem for the United Methodist Church with that campaign of ecclesial disobedience was that the United Methodist Church, in its founding documents, never anticipated a day where bishops and pastors would not want to repent if they were told, you are behaving in a way that is contrary to the values and the doctrines of the church. So the assumption was always, hey, I see you doing this. We need to correct. You need to stop doing that. The assumption was always that pastors and bishops would go, oh my gosh, yes, you're right. I do want to uphold what I promised to. It didn't contemplate what would happen if people said, I simply disagree, and I'm not going to do what the church wants me to do or says I'm supposed to do. There was no enforcement mechanism in this circumstance because the doctrines, the disciplines of the United Methodist Church always assumed integrity from its ecclesial officers, the bishops and the pastors of the church. And so it created this incredible powder keg that has now been going off and on, and now with some real force over the course of the last 12 months. In addition to all of that, there are all these other outside factors that have been pressing on the United Methodist Church. For instance, in 2016 at General Conference, from the main stage, the alarm was pulled on the long-term financial stability of the United Methodist Church. Every financial model showed that the United Methodist Church, if they kept going without making serious systemic changes, would simply run out of money to fund all the ministry and work, staff, budgets of those 13 general agencies and of the larger denomination. They commissioned a task force to study this and to report back. Again, the task force was populated by people who you would consider on kind of all the spectrum of the political or social political issues of the United Methodist Church. In fact, so you know that it's not just a group of wild conservatives, Bishop Mike McKee of the North Texas Annual Conference, he was on the commission that reported back on the financial instability of the United Methodist Church. In 2018, that commission reported back to the General Conference in a report you can read for yourself on the United Methodist websites. What it said was this: from 2010 to 2018, the United Methodist Church had experienced a conference and they say, listen, this is how much we want to spend, so this is how much money you need to give us. I have never worked in a job where I got to go into the person who pays me and say, I want a new $1 million home this year, and I want a Rolls Royce to drive, and so I'm going to need you to set my pay at $2.7 million this year. That's not how my household budget works. I find out how much income is coming into the house, and then I set my spending based on what's available. So if you don't know, every year, the United Methodist denomination at the denominational level spends $151 million. 77 million of that goes to the 13 general agencies. Maybe someone here can. Can anyone name all 13? I can't either. Never have been able to. Never in my career have I ever, 20 years in ministry, I've never called a general agency to ask them for help with doing something in the local church. I have called a few times to complain about the bureaucratic processes that is required to do something. My point is, that's a lot of our giving going to things that really are distant and separated from the ministry we're doing in our local church areas. Now, I want to be fair. In 2012, the United Methodist Church tried to do something about that, but the institution stopped them from even being able to address the problem. At the end of the day, the way apportionments work on the local level, churches are taxed not based on how they're doing, but how they're doing based on how everybody else is doing. And so even if your church is the same this year as you were last year, but everyone else is doing worse, you're going to pay more. Because the share has to come from somewhere because the spending's already been set. And so churches that maintain, churches that grow are disadvantaged financially because they end up paying a greater share of the total. That's why coming out of COVID, my church did not just explode with growth, but we did hold our own. But most of the churches in our conference did not, and that's why when the budget went up 3.2%, our apportionment went up 17%, because they needed the additional revenue that others weren't able to provide. All right, in 2019, we did have a special called General Conference that was supposed to deal with this matter decisively, the matter of human sexuality. Maybe if we have a General Conference that only talks about this, we can just settle it, and then our next General Conference, we can talk about other things. The conference gathered, they met. Once again, by about the same narrow margins, they reaffirmed the traditional language surrounding human sexuality. However, at that general conference, they also recognized that the pressure was not going to go away, that it was going to continue to increase. And so they included in the legislation a paragraph that became known as the gracious exit. What they said was, look, not everybody's going to live together on this issue anymore. There are people who are already leaving on either side. We need to make a way to relieve some of the pressure out of this thing. And so they passed this clause into the discipline that allows churches to leave with their property intact if they just want out of this conundrum, out of this pressure cooker. But one of the things they did was they agreed to put a sunset clause on it of December 31, 2023. This is back in 2019. The reason for that is they knew that General Conference was going to be meeting in May of 2020 and that a protocol to separate the church was coming, to have a negotiated settlement where we would simply divide the church as equitably as possible and move forward as friends. So, Oh, he just coughed. Oh, Scott, you coughed. I heard it. I'm just kidding. Yeah, well, I'm used to guffaws when I'm preaching, so I didn't know if that's what that was. So I'm so sorry. So at the end of the day, what they thought was, okay, well, in 2020, the church will separate, and some people will not know which way they want to go right away. And so the gracious exit will allow them to move back and forth until they all settle out. But by 2024, all of this will be done and settled. And so the United Methodist Church, the continuing United Methodist Church, will want to preserve the trust clause that forces churches to stay in the denomination. And so we're going to sunset that clause out and close the door right before the 2024 General Conference. Well, of course, COVID hits in 2020, and General Conference is postponed to 2021, gets postponed again from 2021, and then it was supposed to be in August of 2022. However, for reasons of their own, the Commission on General Conference decided simply not to do the General Conference anymore, and that they simply would not meet again until 2024. The reason why all that's significant is it means that the next time the United Methodist General Conference convenes, the ability of a church to leave the denomination will have expired. It will have closed. It's not going to be available anymore. And so the decision was made to launch the new Traditionalist Methodist Church, which then subsequently was titled the Global Methodist Church. Now, the thing I want to say is it was not a sudden development. As early as 2019 and the beginning, January of 2020, that protocol for separation had been agreed to by leadership left, right, and center in the United Methodist Church. We knew who the delegates to 2020 were. We knew how they were going to vote. It was going to pass. It was going to pass. And so, knowing it was going to pass, plans began to form for the traditional denomination so that when this agreed upon settlement takes place, the continuing United Methodist Church will become the progressive or more liberal Methodist expression, and this new thing would become the ongoing traditional side. And so as early as January of 2020, plans were being laid, thinking by May, this all is coming to a head, and we've got to have a denomination ready to go. So this traditionalist denomination had been in the works for years by the time General Conference Commission said we're not going to have General Conference anymore until 2024, and the exit clause is closed. So the decision was made to go ahead and launch this denomination that had been long conceived of and prepared for this moment. So here we come into 2022, and now we're at the start of 2023. I can report to you that there are about 580 churches in Texas that have disaffiliated already from the United Methodist Church in 2022. About 480 of those have joined the Global Methodist Church already. Nationally, about 2,000 churches have disaffiliated as of 2022 from the United Methodist Church. And in Texas, we know that probably another 200 to 300 churches are working their way through the disaffiliation process in Texas right now. Largely in Rio, Texas, and in North Texas, where there have been more hurdles and challenges to even entering into a process than were had in the Houston area, Fort Worth area, and Lubbock area conferences in Texas. We do believe that by the time January of 2024 hits, at least half or more of United Methodist churches will have disaffiliated in Texas, and the large majority of them will have joined the Global Methodist Church. We have currently 3 annual conferences in Texas in the Global Methodist Church. They are the Eastern Texas, the Mid-Texas, which we are currently in, and the Western Plains Conference. I will say that all of these conferences are committed that after the time of separation and resettling has finished, that local churches who are on boundary areas will have the opportunity to self-select and decide which conference is the best for the people in the church. In fact, a good example, in our area, Marlin Methodist Church is about 25 minutes outside of Waco, but they belong to the Houston area conference. And they were like, look, when we go to HEB, we go to Waco. Can we please go there for, denominational things? And it was not a long, drawn-out process like it is to move conferences in the United Methodist Church. It was like this. Wait, that makes it easier for you as a local church? Yes, it does. Okay, done. Sign the paper. Done. It was literally done in 3 minutes. And so that's just kind of to give you the flavor, the value of how the Global Methodist Church deals with those kinds of institutional things. Is the first question is, what is in the best interest of the local church? What makes ministry in a local community easier? What empowers the local church laity to more effectively carry out their mission in their local community? Okay, let's do that. Let's bend our systems, let's bend our rules around what makes ministry more effective in the local setting. I've already mentioned Truett Theological Seminary, but we did begin a training center for Methodists a little about 18 months ago with Billy Abraham, who was our inaugural director. I mentioned to you kind of our enrollment. So we are excited to know that we will have lots of young women and men preparing and ready to fill the pulpits of Global Methodist churches around Texas and the nation. After all that history, I return to the question with which I began. What is this all about? And that's the reasons why and how we got here. My humble suggestion to you, or maybe differently put, what it ended up being about for me is a couple of things. Number one, it is about the person and nature of Jesus Christ. I've served on the Board of Ordained Ministry in 2 different annual conferences. And it is sometimes surprising for people in the church to hear, but the truth is, the United Methodist Church is not of one mind on the person and nature of Jesus Christ. That is that big tent expression of religious pluralism that I discussed. For me, Ryan Barnett, and for the Global Methodist Church, Jesus Christ is the one and only, not the one of many. I do not believe that all roads lead to Rome. I take Jesus at his word that unless you come through me, you do not come to the Father. Now, there are people who do not believe that. And the difference is subtly picked up in the ear, but it usually sounds like this. If you say, do you affirm that Jesus is the Lord? The response is, Jesus is my Lord. Yes, but is he the Lord of all? Well, he's my Lord, but who am I to say that he's anybody else's? I want you to hear that in the Global Methodist Church, we believe that Jesus Christ is the Lord of all. Whether they acknowledge him or not, God has granted him authority over heaven and earth. And so all judgment belongs to him, all authority belongs to him, and that was God's holy decision, and it was a merciful one for us. A sinner like me is grateful that Jesus is the Lord of me, even when I didn't acknowledge him in life, that he never gave up on me, that he had a plan for me, that he wanted to pursue me with his love, with his mercy, with his tenderness, that he wanted more for me than I knew I wanted for my life. And friends, I like proclaiming that. I like being able to meet someone on the street and tell them, Jesus is your Lord, and he would love to meet you. He would love for you to meet him, more appropriately put. So this is about the person and the nature of Jesus. At the highest levels, there's a famous picture of one of our Western bishops holding up a sign that says, "We are all Muslims." Now, I know the intent in the heart was to say, we can care about our neighbor, and I agree with that. But that sign is offensive not only to Orthodox Christians, but to Muslims, who are highly offended that the idea that a Christian and Muslim is the same thing. We have different beliefs. We believe different things about who God is, and that's okay for us to hold our differences and believe them. and to speak them. So the nature and person of Jesus Christ is a big deal. The second thing that for me this has always been about is the authority of Scripture. Is Scripture a good guide, true when it is and can be set aside when it isn't? Or is it truly the inspired Word of God that is good for all things, for teaching, rebuking, and instructing in righteousness? Is it a double-edged sword, sharp enough to slice between bone and marrow? For me, the Word of God is God's Word to me. And there are parts that make me extraordinarily uncomfortable. My church knows, because sometimes when I'm preaching on them, I'm like, this is a squirm-worthy one today. Like this one's going to make us all squirm. And I know what makes me squirm in there may not make you squirm in there, but what makes you squirm may not make me squirm. But to believe that the Bible is God's holy word is to say that I'm not going to judge the word, but I'm going to let the word judge me. And it's uncomfortable when anyone points out error in us. I don't like it either. But I'm just telling you, for me, for Ryan Barnett, I want, if I am wrong, if the Lord thinks I'm wrong, I would rather him tell me, take the rebuke of it, deal with it, and make a change than continue being wrong about any number of topics. And if you want a full list, you can ask my wife. She has one, and she can provide it to you of all the things. So there is this discrepancy, and has been for a long time in the United Methodist Church, about the nature of the authority of Scripture. How do we understand what we're reading? How do we apply it? Is it true just in particular times for particular people? Or is it eternally valid for all of God's people? In the global Methodist Church, we affirm the high view of authority of Scripture, and that it absolutely is the full and final word, and that we're called to wrestle with it. But at the end of the day, we let it have the final word in our lives to be instructive for us. Beyond those are the two biggies. I'm just telling you, that's the beating heart of the body that is having a heart attack. The issues of human sexuality, of reproductive choice, and these are like your left arm tingling while the heart's failing. You notice the symptom, but that's not what's going to kill you. It's the very core of our identity. There is also a large debate about the focus of the denomination. Are we focused on the needs of the institution or of the local church? That shows up in how we use our time and how we use our money. I can tell you and speak favorably for the GMC that the absolute focus of the GMC is the local church. And you will hear that as we look through this little chart that we're going to talk about. From there are a lot of other issues that are in play. Human sexuality is certainly one of them. But hear me when I tell you all those other issues, human sexuality, abortion, Israel. Every year at General Conference, there's an effort to divest any money that we have invested in any Israeli company at all. That is always defeated by the same margin and the same people who have held the traditional language on human sexuality. So all those issues that are out there, there's a lot of them, but at the end of the day, they emanate out of disagreement about the person and nature of Jesus and the authority of Scripture and the focus of the denomination, whether it's at an institutional level or a local church level. All right, John Wesley said, "I'm not afraid that the people called Methodist should ever cease to exist, either in Europe or America, but I am afraid lest they should only exist as a dead sect, having the form of religion without the power. And this undoubtedly will be the case unless they hold fast both to the doctrine, spirit, and discipline with which they first set out." So if you turn that page over, now's the moment. and this is why I wanted to share with you before you looked at it. I want to acknowledge that what you see here on both sides of this is a prediction. It's a prediction. It is not a guess, though. It is what people who have been working in general conferences and in global denomination for a long time have been working in the midst of. I will tell you, I've been in ministry 20 years. I was on the board of directors for the Confessing Movement for 5. I've been the executive vice president of Good News Magazine. I was a founder of the Wesley Covenant Association. And in every one of those organizations, my primary focus, and the focus of the organization, was to bring revival and renewal to the United Methodist Church so that the day would not come that we have now arrived at. That was the sold-out focus of my ministry, aside from the local church, was to try to hold us fast to those doctrines and disciplines of which John Wesley spoke of. Unfortunately, that effort was not successful, and so here we are. But I say that because none of this is a stretch, and all of it is the expected outcome. So I want to walk through here with you, and in the process, say less about the United Methodist Church, but more about who the Global Methodist Church sees themselves to be. The name of a post-separation UMC will keep the name United Methodist Church. The Global Methodist Church will be Global Methodist. The theology in a post-separation UMC will continue to be one of a big tent pluralism. That Jesus is one way that you can be saved. That is the case today. I have watched pastors get ordained who that is the theology they espouse, and by 75% majority of the pastors in the room, because that's what's required, they're off to serve the church. And so that is already the case. In the Global Methodist Church, we will follow a classic Orthodox Wesleyan understanding of theology, which is that Jesus is the one and only. What about General Conference and Annual Conference? Yes, in the UMC, continue to be there. And yes, in the Global Methodist Church, we'll have annual conferences and a General Conference. Although General Conference in the GMC will meet every 6 years instead of every 4, which is kind of like, you wish you could tell Congress, why don't you just meet every 4 years? That'd be more than enough. We've decided every 6 will be plenty. I will say that the annual conference boundaries are going to be changing in the Global Methodist Church. They will also be changing in the United Methodist Church. Annual conference boundaries were going to change because so many churches are dying. We can't support the bureaucracy, and so they keep consolidating the conferences. This conference consolidated 2 conferences into 1. So we know here. What about boards and agencies? Yes, the post-separation UMC, they'll continue to have their 13 general agencies with all their staff and overhead. The Global Methodist Church has a new, leaner structure with a single connectional officer overseeing it. 1, not 13, 1. Now, I want to say that, again, I feel these are things I worked for in the United Methodist Church, and in 2012, we passed it, and then it got vetoed. But that idea of slimming down and narrowing to where we have one person who is accountable for what's happening and in charge to make sure it's carried out. The Global Methodist Church has the great benefit of beginning from the beginning with a clean slate and doing it the way that we'd kind of hoped maybe it would have gone. What about international membership? I think by 2025, this prediction will be accurate, that the post-separation UMC will have a significant body of churches in the United States, Western Europe, and parts of the Philippines. They will have churches in other places, but in terms of significant body, I think that's where. The Global Methodist Church, U.S., Africa, Eastern Europe, parts of the Philippines, Latin America, Asia. We are already joining Global Methodist churches in large numbers in areas of the world that do not have United Methodists, but they have independent national Methodist churches that are interested in being a part of an Orthodox Wesleyan movement like ours, and so they are joining in. Trust clause on local church properties. As you hopefully know, in the United Methodist Church, all local church property, bank accounts, assets, the bus in the parking lot, all of it owned by the annual conference. In the Global Methodist Church, all local church properties, bank accounts, and assets are owned by the local church. This is a fact. I received the deeds to all the properties that First Methodist owns, title in our name, when we moved into the Global Methodist Church. They are solely owned and held by the First Methodist Church of Waco, Texas, for the use of ministry at First Methodist Church of Waco, Texas. What about apportionments? Apportionments nationally run typically between 10 and 12% of a church's annual income, maybe a little less for some, but that's the national rate. In the GMC, we'll have apportionments, but the absolute max that apportionments can be is 6.5% of a church's income. And the way it works is really very simple. The church, at the end of the year, says, how much revenue did we have for our operating budget? How much money came in to do the ministries of the church? It's this amount, okay? We multiply it times this percentage, and in the next year, that's how much we give to the denomination. So it's responsive to what's going on. So if you have a really hard year, pastor leaves, people get mad, money goes down, you're not still paying as if everything is going great. It's immediately adjusted. On the other side, you're growing, you're booming, you're doing great, you have more resources to give, then it moves with that. Now, pay attention, the 6.5% is the max. It is the cap. It is the limit. And what that limit represents is 5% max for the annual conference, 1.5% max for the national denomination. Currently, today, the way it sits, the national GMC is asking for 1% of the church's annual income for the annual apportionment, and the Mid-Texas Conference set our apportionment rate at 3%. So if, for instance, this church was to move into the Global Methodist Church, you would pay 4% of your annual income in apportionment. I'm not exactly sure what the math would be here for you all, but you can do that. Whoever the finance chair is, you can do that. I can tell you, at my church, our annual apportionments went from $263,000 to $120,000. So pretty dramatic. I will also say this. At the time that my church disaffiliated from the conference had $22.5 million in reserve funds that they had collected over the years from local churches and just sat on. The Global Methodist Church, Mid-Texas Conference Global Methodist Church, established a cap that we would hold reserves of no more than 6 months of conference operations in reserve. And if that number gets exceeded, we will either lower apportionments or we will give rebates of apportionments to the churches who paid in that year, because we do not want to be stuck in a position of hoarding cash. That's not why people give it. Having an emergency reserve fund, that makes good sense. Rainy days happen. Hopefully you have a little savings at your house. Hope you have a little at your church. But you don't, 22.5 million, it was 3 years worth of full apportionments that the conference was sitting on while the churches were struggling through COVID, charging us an increase in apportionments. So we have no interest in that. I will also say this. The Mid-Texas Conference has also established a cap that no church, no matter what their income is, will never pay more than $150,000 in apportionments. We have churches in our conference that pay $800,000. I can't even imagine. It turns my stomach. $150,000 cap. GMC's not interested in getting rich off the back of local churches, is the bottom line. We just have zero interest in that. What about bishops? In the United Methodist Church, bishops are elected for life, and they are accountable to each other. And not even to all of each other, they're accountable only to each other in a geographic area. So right now in the Western jurisdiction, you have a bishop that the Judicial Council said was not qualified to serve in the role, overseeing the trial of another bishop who was brought up on charges of misconduct. So it's really rough. This is something that in 2012, General Conference tried to address and pass to term limit bishops so that they would not be elected for life. So there was a recall mechanism, and to change the accountability structure so that the bishops would have to answer to the people who elected them, not just to each other. So that's the way it will be in the GMC, is bishops will be elected for a term, and they'll be accountable back to the people who elected them. I put in there to the local church, in not like just this church, but to the local churches, to the body of the people. What about clergy deployment? This is something that's super exciting, both as a pastor, but also as someone who, looks at what works well in churches. As you may know, in the UMC, ordained clergy are guaranteed an appointment by the bishop regardless of their ministry outcomes. So don't do well at this church, go to that church and don't do well there too. And then go to the next one and don't do well there too. And listen, this is the bane of a district superintendent's existence. If you talk to any of them and they're honest, they will tell you that the worst part of their job is every year they sit down to do appointments, and they know that a third of the pastors they send out are going to do well, and the churches are going to do well, and they're going to have a good experience, and about a third will just be okay, won't rock the boat one way or the other, and about a third of them, the churches are going to struggle. And whose turn is it to struggle? And who can handle it? Who can stand up to it? And for how long? And then we'll have to move them again. It's an unenviable hand, and it's one, again, 10 years ago we tried to change. In the Global Methodist Church, there is no guarantee of appointment. What's more, it's no longer the case in the GMC that the bishop just appoints a pastor. In the GMC, you do not get a phone call that says, pack your house, you're moving to this place. The way appointments work in the GMC is very collaborative, and this is factual. I can tell you this factually because we're doing it. We've been doing it. We've made about 22, 25 appointments in the Global Methodist Church since November 1st, just in our conference. And the way it works is this: if there's pastoral transition, the presiding elder, we don't have district superintendents that oversee 100 churches. We have presiding elders that are in covenant relationship with about 5 to 10 churches and pastors. They meet weekly for accountability. The pastors meet weekly with their presiding elder to be accountable to each other for their ministry, for the spiritual health, for their soul. The presiding elder meets with the church. Here's what it is that they're looking for. The bishop, or in our case right now, until we can have election of bishops, we have what are called president pro tems, presidents of the conferences, who are functioning in that kind of episcopal role in this transitional period. They are required to send 3 or more candidates to the church to meet with the staff parish relations committee to be interviewed. The church can invite them to come preach on a Sunday if they want. They can go online, listen to all their sermons. They can research their Facebook profiles, see what, crazy things they've been up to and whether or not that would be a good fit here. But this is twofold, friends, because at the same time, the pastors are interviewing the churches to see if it's a good fit, to see if it's somewhere that they want to be. And the truth is, if the pastor doesn't want to be at a church, it's not going to work. If it's not the right community for them, if their kids are going to be unhappy, if their spouse is going to be unfulfilled because they can't find the right work, your church is going to suffer. And you don't want that. And so it's a mutual interview process. The church has the opportunity to say, we like that one, and if that pastor wants to be there, that's the pastor, that's the appointment. If the church says, we didn't like any of those, the president says, okay, well, tell us what you did like and what you didn't like, and we're going to send you some more candidates to look at. The local church can say, my sister-in-law's church is over here. I was there and heard the pastor, and I would love for that person to be a candidate. And the president can call them and say, hey, First San Angelo is interested in, interviewing with you. They've got a position open. Would you be interested in going talking to them? And they can choose whether they do or don't. So in this sense, local churches have agency in the appointive process. It's built in. It's not dependent on the bishop. Different bishops do it in different ways. I've had ones that were highly collaborative. Like when I would want to appoint, if I would want a new associate, the bishop would really let me interview and decide. We got a new bishop, and he announced to the large church pastors, we will call you after we've reappointed your associates to let you know we did that. That's their prerogative. It's a terrible way to run a church in the local setting. It's just not, it's not great. So the GMC says, we'll send you candidates, your SPR will interview them. If everybody's agreeable, it's an appointment. We've been really surprised, honestly. Some of the people we thought, oh, they're definitely going to pick that person. Nope. We had a rural community who selected a Korean pastor. They never would have been appointed there if it was like, okay, just, we're going to send this Korean pastor to this rural community. But he had a PhD, and they loved him. And he loved them. It was like a match made in heaven. It's going great. Church is growing. They never would have been appointed in an old system. But the people there knew what they needed, and the pastor knew what he wanted. And it worked, and it is working. It is working. The other end of that is this. Your pastor will not leave your church until you tell them to, or they decide they want to. That's it. So if your SPR, PPR, whatever it is, says, listen, it's been a good run, really appreciate it, it's time to do something new. Then that pastor is going to go, and the president pro tem is going to get with you to start talking about what you need. Likewise, if the pastor hears about some other church that has an opportunity and they go and interview there, they may choose to go somewhere else. In other words, it's like every other job in the world in that sense, that there is some autonomy and freedom. And the reason why that's important is if it's not working, the church is suffering. If it's not working for the pastor, the church is suffering. If it's not working for the church is suffering. And the pastor is too. All right, clergy appointment length, UMC, it's 1 year at a time. That's it. In the GMC, it's open-ended. I've already gone over that. Once you get there, you're there until you say something different. What about female clergy at all levels? Both answers yes. This has been a misconception about the GMC. It's humorous to me because my boss is a woman. Our president pro tem is Dr. Leah Hitty Gregory. She was my district superintendent. She's just one of the best I've ever had. Just super. I knew we were going to get along when I met her for the first time, and her license plate was a vanity plate, and it said Gate Stormer. That was her district motto for her pastors, storm the gates. I'm like, yep, I can follow that. And so she is the president pro tem. The chair of the TLC, Transitional Leadership Council of the Global Methodist Church, in other words, the highest ranking officer of the Global Methodist Church is a lay woman from Oklahoma. The chair before her, also a woman. So female leadership at all levels, it's already there. Welcoming of LGBTQ plus people, the answer is identical in both. Yes, all people are of sacred worth. I assume that's been true here at First Methodist San Angelo, that you have welcomed people. And you've been in a denomination that says the practice of homosexuality is incompatible with Christian teaching. I assume you've welcomed greedy people too. I assume you've welcomed jerks. We're the church. This is what we do. It's like, if sinners can't show up here, where are we going to go? All people are welcome because all people are of sacred worth. Now, will clergy perform same-sex marriages, and will churches host those marriage ceremonies? In the post-separation UMC, the answer will be yes. It's not yet, but it will be. That's why this thing is happening. It's what has been pushed for every 4 years, and the people who have won the vote every 4 years are leaving the denomination. You need to hear me, because I actually know their names and the counts of them. They're gone. They won't be there. Non-celibate gay and transgender pastors serving local churches, post-separation UMC, yes. Please understand, that's what is being fought for. That's what the people who are going to be holding the reins of the denomination have been fighting for. And so, yes, of course. The answer in the Global Methodist Church is no. Position on abortion, post-separation UMC will most certainly be pro-choice. If you don't believe that, go back to the 2016 General Conference, where that same traditionalist majority, by the same percentage vote, forced the general agencies of the United Methodist Church to remove themselves from the RCRC, which is the Religious Coalition for Reproductive Choice. They were already promoting a pro-choice policy. The Global Methodist Church believes that life begins at conception and is sacred to God. Primary focus of the church, I think the post-separation UMC will continue to be social justice, at least from a denominational standpoint. I think that I know the Global Methodist Church's primary focus is saving souls. Now, hear me clearly. The United Methodist Church will save souls. I'm not saying they won't evangelize, convert people to the faith, and I'm going to applaud that. I'm just saying what the primary focus, I think that's what it's been from a denominational level. So that's what it will continue to be. And on the other side, Global Methodist Church, our primary focus is saving souls, but we believe in social holiness. John Wesley said there is no personal holiness apart from social holiness. We're people of Wesley. So, I mean, we're on board. We're in it. But it's not our primary focus. Our primary focus is saving souls. Clergy pensions, yes, secured and administered by Westpath. Even though I'm not sure I'm wild about this, in the GMC, clergy pension secured by Westpath. So I'm once again enrolled with Westpath somehow. I don't know how that keeps happening to me. Denominational logos are there. Just a quick word, because people are often curious about those denominational logos. If you were to disaffiliate from the United Methodist Church, all the places where you have the cross and flame that would be used for marketing or communications purposes have to be removed. The law does allow for trademarked images to be used in art, expressions of art. So like if you have it in stained glass, you do not have to take stained glass down. There's an exemption for memorials or historical markers. So if you got that plaque somewhere with cross and flame, it can stay up. Honestly, even the hymnals can stay, because any church can buy a UMC hymnal, branded hymnal from Cokesbury. Baptist church can if they want to. And you may even have some Baptist hymnals somewhere up in here. We do in our church. So there you go. All that to say this, I know separation is painful. It's painful for all of us, and nobody was hoping this would happen. Even the people who are leading the way in the Global Methodist Church, prior to that, we were the ones leading towards the reformation of the UMC, trying to hold this thing to her classic identity. But it's probably come to a place where it is necessary. And it doesn't have to be wrong, all right? The separation itself, now the process by which we do it can be really wrong. We can really fall into sin in how we go through it. But if you remember in Genesis chapter 13, Abram said to Lot, his nephew, let's not have fighting between us, between your shepherds and my shepherds. After all, we're family. Look around. Isn't there plenty of land out there? Let's separate. If you go left, I'll go right. You go right, I'll go left. You move in faithfulness in that way, I'll move in faithfulness this way. We're still family. And it can be that way. Probably not if we are ugly or demeaning or throw stones, but if we're prayerful, thoughtful, allow space for the other who thinks differently, but has a closely held belief, we can stay family. Churches now have a choice, and I want to give you credit that you acknowledge that there is this choice that does have to be made. Some churches have thought, well, we just don't have to decide, so we'll just wait. That is a choice. Doing nothing is a choice. So our choices are, we can stay in the UMC forever, and that's a choice that this congregation can make. We're UMC, proud to be UMC. We're going to stay UMC. We're going to do a great job UMC. It's important to know what the benefits of that are. It's also important to count the costs of that. You will be a part of a denomination that is increasingly progressive and liberal on all social issues and in their core theology. There will be less room for people who think with a traditional mindset. I hate to say that, but I know it's true. One of the members of my clergy team, his name is Gabe Dominguez. Gabe was in prison. He was on Waco's most wanted list in his younger days. Came up out of poverty, found the Lord. He's now a pastor on my staff. When Gabe expressed that he believed that marriage was between a man and a woman alone, he was kicked off of the conference task force on inclusivity because we can't believe that way here anymore. And so it's just unfortunately happening. I think you have to be aware of that, and if that's where you want to go, then you should go that way, because that is where it's headed. I do think the UMC is headed for a struggle with this bureaucratic nightmare, and some of the more entrepreneurial people who have proposed solutions through the years are now applying those and creating those new things in a new denomination. It's possible that you could stay in the UMC for now and see what happens in 2024. Let's see if these predictions are right. I would say to you, if you think you're going to go, now's the time. If you think there's a chance that you wouldn't want to be, now's the time. It may be possible to go later, but it may not be. It certainly will never be simpler or as inexpensive as it is right now. And I'm not saying it's inexpensive. I'm just saying it's not going to get less so as more churches leave and less money is in the coffers for the denomination. The other thing is you can choose to leave now, to say, look, we don't want to go where you're going, but we do want to go where someone else is going. And if that's what you want to do, now's the time to do it. It truly is. If you make the decision to leave, obviously you have other decisions in front of you. Some churches have chosen to go independent. I don't recommend that. It's hard. We're not Congregationalists by nature. We're Wesleyan, we're Methodist. There's no such thing as an independent Methodist church. Because connectionalism is baked in. Funnily enough, like in the early days, we'd have churches that would call us and say, like, hey, we want to go independent. Can you help us do that? We're like, I don't think it's a good idea for you. Like, why? What do you mean, why? You're calling for help. There are other Methodist denominations beside the Global Methodist. There's the Free Methodist Church, the Nazarene Church, the Wesleyan Church. There's new associations that are forming, mostly of larger churches that really kind of want to be independent but connected with other people. Lots of options out there. I think if you want to be a part of a worldwide movement that is large and robust and that has a storehouse of clergy appointments and you fit in theologically, the GMC is a good place to go, a good place to land. If you really just want to, be in a more regional association without the kind of accountability and structures, then those options are available. And that certainly is something that you can do. Before I take questions, I'll just leave you with this one thought and question for you to ponder on. And it's the one that I think helped me the most, helped my church the most, and has helped the most churches that I've spoken with. There's so many moving pieces in all this, so many emotions and feelings. Many of you are like me. I mean, I have my little Bible I got when I was baptized at League City United Methodist Church, and my confirmation Bible I got at Friendswood United Methodist Church. I was ordained in the United Methodist Church. My robe that I'm so proud of because my grandparents gave it to me when I was dead broke, and I was almost embarrassed to ask them because they're already so generous and giving me this robe, but it was so important to me. Would you pay for the extra cost of stitching the cross and flame? Because I was so proud to be, so that's a lot. How do you make these decisions? The question that has helped me, and I think a lot of churches the most, is to boil it all down to this. Ask this question: what decision allows our church to be most effective in making disciples for Jesus Christ in San Angelo, Texas? Because that's still the mission of the church, regardless of what brand is on the building, because Jesus actually said this is the mission of the church, is to make disciples. So I would say pray and put that question before the Lord. Lord, what decision in all of this allows your church, because it's his, he's given more to it than you have. You've given a lot, he's given more. It's his before it was yours. So Lord, what decision allows your church to be most effective in making disciples in San Angelo, Texas, and in the world? Maybe I can take any questions, Scott, that anybody might have, and then we'll close in some prayer, and I'm happy to linger. If you have a question that you don't want to ask on a microphone or in front of everybody, I'm happy to linger. You've got one in the front row right here. And if you don't mind, just tell me your name.
I'm Fran Centel.
Fran?
Fran Centel.
Nice to meet you.
Oh my gosh, what a bunch of people. I was going to speak to this many people. I have read your discipline for the Global Methodist Church, which is 105 pages, pretty dry reading, and but on the apportionments, 6.5% sounds pretty good. 5% staying in the annual conference also sounds pretty good. But a problem I have with it is that each annual conference of the Global United Methodist Church is going to be charged with the salary and expenses of an African Methodist church. And in Africa, gays are hated, they are persecuted, they are put in prison for 10 years. So we have a choice between what our choice is sounds like it's going to be, and we don't like change. I don't like change. I'm 91 years old. I don't like change. But we can have a church that recognizes same-sex marriages and brings them into full membership, or we can find ourselves supporting a huge majority of people that hate gays. So I think we have to make up our mind, which bad choice do we make? But for me, I would choose the loving choice, which is to welcome them, recognize their same-sex marriage, which is the law of the land already, and to be and work it out. And there was another thing. Hang on. Okay, all right, the other one is, we are, no matter which way this goes, we're going to lose members. Because although we love each other, I don't think we can all agree and make one decision on this. So we're going to lose members. We've got this big, expensive, wonderful facility here to support. And after we have paid our salaries for our pastor, paid our utilities, paid our insurance, and we don't have enough money left to pay our apportionments. If we're global, we're going to be disaffiliated. And so we're going to be out in the cold. We're not going to be United Methodist. We're not going to be global. So, and that's not the case in the United Methodist Church. We have a lot of churches that cannot pay their apportionments, but they don't lose their affiliation with the United Methodist Church. That's it.
Thank you, Fran. Let me just say a couple of things just to be clear. I have traveled extensively in Africa among United Methodists there, and I've not found someone that hates homosexuals. There are laws in countries that do discriminate on the basis of human sexuality. I would point out that most of those are African nations that are led by Muslim governments. Africa is a continent, and so every country there is different, with different contexts and different things. It is the case today in the United Methodist Church that your apportionments are supporting conferences, bishops, pastors, and churches in Africa. The difference between the UMC and the GMC is how we're going to do that. So in the UMC, they'll take your apportionments and decide, how to do that support. The reason why the GMC chose to partner conferences overseas, not just Africa, by the way, but in any developing part of the world, with a partner conference in the States, is so that the churches on the ground can have personal relationships with the church's pastors and people that they are in ministry with and supporting overseas, so that it's not just we send our money across, but that we actually engage in intentional relationship, faith development across through multiple countries. The only other thing I'd say is I don't disagree that the reading of the 109 pages of the Global Methodist Doctrines and Disciplines is dry, but I wouldn't say that it's more dry than the 1,300 pages of the United Methodist discipline. So, if you're not going to be interesting, at least be short, which I know I didn't. I know I didn't accomplish here tonight, but I will say that. Yeah. And in particular, if you have a question, maybe that I might answer.
I don't have to introduce myself. Scott already introduced me earlier.
You were arms crossed?
Yeah, I'm the
okay.
arms crossed guy.
All right. I'll keep my arms open to you.
I'm not going to judge much because, as you said earlier, Jesus is the judge. But I've long thought, and a lot of people know that the Methodist Church was a corporate church. You give the money, you have to mail it off, you never see it. So I'm glad that's a good deal. The 2/3 majority for the vote, who picked 2/3?
The General Conference of 2019, in the gracious exit language, established that as the amount necessary to vote.
Well, they'll get judged on that. What about if we, as an older congregation, lose people and we can't afford this facility? Just the insurance is $330,000 a year.
Yeah.
Would you all encourage other churches to close and come with us, or is there any help from y'all in doing that, or are we just left with this huge deal that we can't maintain and can't sell?
Yeah. I think for me to speculate in the hypothetical would be a challenge, other than to say we are working in all kinds of circumstances and scenarios with churches all across Texas right now. I also want to say this, not predictively for you because I don't know your congregation, but I can tell you that the churches who have voted to move into the Global Methodist Church who have lost members, first, it's not a guarantee. I didn't lose 10% of my membership, even though 10% voted to stay. I did lose some, but most churches who have that experience have not seen a significant decline in giving, even from departing members. I mean, the overall giving has been pretty stable. It went up in my church.
But it's still individual churches have to worry about that, right?
They do. You know, I would say the difference is if you're in the United Methodist denomination and you get to where ultimately you can't pay your bills, eventually the annual conference is going to take your property and they are going to dispose of it, and whatever they can get out of it, they are going to keep. The difference here would be, I mean, like if a catastrophic failure took place, the assets are yours to leverage and do with what is in the best interest of Methodists in San Angelo. Not, we're going to take your thing because you haven't paid your apportionments and sell it and then go plant a church somewhere else.
Well, you had a great idea when you eliminated district superintendents. That's a great idea. And one thing I want to say is that I don't think the Methodists have ever addressed is a lot of us are here because our parents went here. Doesn't work that way today.
No.
Parents go to church where their kids want to go. You have a plan for that?
I mean, yes. I mean, I can tell you, I don't know if the name Rusty Freeman means anything to you all. Rusty was the director of youth ministry for the Southwest Texas Conference for a decade. Under him, the youth ministry program of the conference exploded. Hundreds and hundreds of kids a year, thousands of kids really a year, and hundreds giving their life to Christ. As you may know, he was invited not to be in that position because the bent of that program was very evangelical. Give your life to Christ. Live sold out. And the decision was, you know, maybe we can do something else with the money, and youth ministry program at the conference level is closed down. Rusty and I and a few others who have decided, well, we'll just start something that churches that are interested in go to. We started a ministry called Revive. Revive is now the next-gen ministry of the Global Methodist Church in mid-Texas. So our annual conference, which we've renamed an Annual Awakening, because we don't want anybody to go to sleep there, has a youth conference going simultaneously. We've got a number of kids there. We've got a youth camp. We've got a children's camp. We've got college ministry. So yeah, I mean, yes.
Well, I think that you need to look at that. The biggest churches in this town are independent churches, which obviously we don't go there. We're here.
Yeah.
I think everything you've done sounds great, and I think that we all appreciate you coming here tonight.
Thank you. I will say, you know, what we have found at our church and others, people who are raising kids, on the one hand, the culture we live in, it has a high shame value if you don't believe what, you know, kind of is on TV and whatever. Like they call it cancel culture, you know, like you're not welcome here, valued if your opinion is different. And so they're not very vocal about their beliefs, but privately, they would like to raise their children in a place where they are going to be taught what's in the Bible and kind of historic Christian values on family and what that is and what the meaning, purpose of it all is. So I don't know how else to say this. I mean, like, it's extraordinary. I never thought it would be the case, but, you know, the criticism is traditional theology runs off the young people, as if the United Methodist Church is just bursting at the seams with youth, you know, with like dark-haired people. Forget it. I mean, that's not who we've been. White and older for a generation. That's part of why the decline. And those non-denominational churches that you say are booming, they are way more conservative than even the most conservative Methodists. And so we are seeing in the GMC and those that are moving that way, we are seeing parents bringing their kids there because they know what it's going to be, what the kids are going to be taught, and they want that for them. It's not universal, but in general, it's my observation. And I would also say, like, when I was ordained in the United Methodist Church, 20 years ago, 18 years ago, the average age of the ordinand class was 55. I was 26. The average age of our very first ordination class that's happening next weekend is 39. I was ordained with all white people. We have African Americans, Koreans, women, Hispanic, Anglos, all getting ordained. Go figure.
If y'all can't hear him, he's telling how great of a youth program that we have.
You're not supposed to tell somebody like me how great one of your associate pastors is, because then he wants to take her.
It's all Chelsea's fault, not mine.
That's great.
For those of you that aren't aware, our youth group for the last 4 years has been involved with Revive, and Chelsea's been on their little planning board or whatever. So
that's great.
First of all, I want to say thank you very much. It was very informative. But you have two strands. One is spiritual, one is bottom line. But the driving factor that's common to both is a declining membership in Methodism. So once the dust clears, how do we redress that issue?
Mm-hmm. Listen, I think the driving force of decline has been theological, in my opinion. And I think the heavy-handed bureaucracy, institutionalism, has strangled out entrepreneurialism that allows our good theology to break loose even where it exists. So I actually think we will see a growth of Methodism, at least I'm only going to speak in the Global Methodist Church because that's what I'm in. I think we're going to see a growth of it, and I think it's driven by high Christology. If you don't believe that Jesus is the Lord, why are you out evangelizing? Why would you get out from your walls and tell, So with that kind of high Christology, it drives evangelistic fervor. And without the bureaucracy kind of sitting on top, it opens up entrepreneurial energy. Again, just anecdotally, my boss, Leah Hitty Gregory, I remember a conversation pretty distinctly early on in my tenure at First Methodist where I said, listen, I've always been the most entrepreneurial person I know. You are my district superintendent, so I want to do what you say, but you have got to slow down. I'm being overwhelmed. Scott knows me. That's saying something, isn't it? Because I go 1,000,000 miles an hour all the time in a single direction, right? I've planted 3 new campuses in Waco, Texas in the 6 years that I've been there. I've started the Wesley House at Truett Seminary. I mean, I love it. I move. And so we have a lot of entrepreneurs that are moving over. And of course, it makes sense. There's a difference between pioneers and settlers. You need pioneers and you need settlers. But the people moving into the Global Methodist Church largely are pioneers, at least the leaders. They want to do something new. They want to get out. They want to go. It's that fervor of the original Methodists as they spread scriptural holiness across the lands. It's also, if that's your mandate, spread scriptural holiness across the lands. That's why we're coming into being, is to do this thing. It's a different posture. It's a go forth. Listen, it's all in the hands of the Spirit of God, really. Nobody comes to faith but through the power of the Spirit at work inside of them. But we are invited to partner with that work and articulate an invitation. And I know it works. I know it's true. I went to a church. I served as the executive pastor at University Methodist in San Antonio for 7 years. If you've been on the property, I'm the one who built the North Campus, the big double gymnasium for the contemporary service. When I got there, we were worshiping 175 people in the old McCreeless gym. When I left, we were averaging 1,500 people. I thought, I'm a gift to this profession, you know? I'm like all of 20-something years old, single guy, working 80-hour weeks. I get married. We decide to start somewhere new together. I go to a church in Corpus Christi where one of the most liberal, progressive pastors wrote an article in the Austin American Statesman. It's time that Jesus moved from the head of the table and let some of the other deities have their turn, being heard. I followed him. He'd been there 10 years. I get in there. I'm like coming from the big steeple, high roller. I go in this church. I'm preaching my guts out, and church is doing okay. And then I have a guy come in and sit in my office. And he's like, "Hey, are you going to continue to offer an invitation at the end of every service for people to give their life to Christ?" I was like, yes. And I was kind of surprised. He was like, "Listen, there's some of us who think you're overemphasizing the need to have a personal relationship with Jesus in order to be saved." I said, "Listen, son," he was young guy. I said, "Listen, son, people leave churches for dumb reasons all the time. I don't like the color of the carpet, and like what song pastor picked, what." It's like, sincere disagreement on the person and nature of Jesus is a real reason. Because he was there to tell me I'm leaving and everyone, this group's going with me. And I said, "I hope you will stay. I really do, because I think there's some things that I can share and show you from Scripture and about grace and about Christ that would be enriching for you. But if that's the decision, it's at least worthy of leaving a church over, that you don't believe the same about Jesus as we do." Well, like 60 people left that church that at the time was worshiping like 200. They had a mortgage that they had gone into that they were paying interest only on, that was set to amortize without a plan for conversion. I'm like, oh man, I am dead. And I remember pulling out the parking lot in my pickup truck and praying. I was like, "God, when things were going so great and everything was growing, and 7 years, I baptized 500 people. I'm like, I always just gave credit to you, Lord." I was like, "Well, if you preach Jesus Christ and you teach from the Word and you tell the church they've got a witness to make in the world, God, you've always done it. And I'm doing those three things. And those are my only moves. And so this thing belongs to you now, because I don't know what to do." And I'm not saying like the next week there was, next week 150 people. But 3 years later, the church was running between 350 and 400 people in worship. And we had dealt with the debt on the building, paid it all off, et cetera, et cetera. Unfortunately, in the years since, they've had some progressive pastors go back, and my understanding is, less than 100 people worshiping there. They've sold one of the parsonages. All that to say, theology matters. It really matters. You've got a pastor, yeah. I think you've got a pastor who loves the Lord, has good theology, teaches from the Bible. He doesn't teach from whatever email he read that week. I know this about him, and my sense is that this church has some vibrancy. I know that there's been hard days out here because I've been in this conference, but you all seem to be in a better trajectory than in some years in the past. And I think A. Scott is lovely, his associates, his staff, all wonderful, but at the end of the day, theology matters to the health and life of the church. So the biggest answer to your question is that. I think we have discovered when everybody's moving in the same direction, there is force of movement that is compelling. I joined 40 people to my church in the 2 Sundays after we voted to go Global Methodist. 40 people joined in the 2 Sundays after we voted. And, they were all like this, well, we're waiting to see what you were going to do. Like, okay. I'm not saying that will happen here. I'm saying it happened to us.
My name is Brenda Stone,
Brenda.
and I'm a member of this church. And I had typed out my questions because I tend to ramble, but you answered some of them already. So I think I heard you say that we can be assured the UMC will become more progressive/liberal. Did I hear you say that?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. I would like to have some way of knowing how we can be assured of that, where that information is coming from. And then on the other side of that, you, I don't think, mentioned the GMC. Are they likely to become more conservative? Those of us, I'm speaking for myself, who are we just like the way things are. We're just moderate. I love my church. I don't like change, like Fran.
Yeah.
So depending if we vote to go UMC, are we going to see ourselves down a pretty dismal track of more progressivism? But on the same side, if we go GMC, are we going to become so conservative that my gay friends will not be welcome here?
Yeah. Let me start with the first part of the question, which is, why do I have a sense that the UMC will go more progressive? A, it has been for the last 50 years of its existence. While our written statements have not changed, our practice has changed dramatically. There's a difference between orthodoxy and orthopraxy. Orthodoxy, right belief; orthopraxy, right practice. We still have orthodoxy in the UMC, but we do not have orthopraxy. So there are self-avowed practicing homosexuals who are appointed and pastoring churches in this conference. There are pastors who have performed same-sex marriages in this conference, who have not had discipline, who continue along. Those acts of ecclesial disobedience have grown in intensity. You have entire boards of ordained ministry who have said, we will simply set aside the provisions of the Book of Discipline based on our own conscience, and that is how we will choose to operate, versus the agreed standards of the whole denomination. Beyond that, it is simple math of the orthodoxy of the written word, I know will change because those votes at General Conference pretty consistently have been 57-43, 53-47. I mean, right in there on all these kinds of issues. And the math for not changing just is no longer there. Even just from the delegates from the U.S. who have left, the math is no longer there to hold a majority opinion on the traditional votes that have been taken on all of these subjects. To put it in perspective, do you know that 10% of United Methodists live in the Congo? 1 in 10 United Methodists lives in the Congo. It just became legal. There had to be a change in national law. It just became legal in the Congo for churches to join the GMC, to leave the UMC and join GMC. My expectation in the next year or two is 100%, 98% of those churches and people will move. So that alone tips the scales. If the Congolese weren't at General Conference, the discipline would have changed a long time ago in the practices related to these things. So you are, in the sense that I don't have a crystal ball that I've looked into, but in terms of when the Republicans won the majority in the Congress, They told us that they were going to launch an investigation in the president, and they've launched an investigation in the president. We didn't know that they would, like no they would, but they told us that's what would happen if they hit majority. We have been told what will happen when the progressives in the U.S. hit majority. And the recent decisions that the leadership of the UMC have made has guaranteed that that will be the case. You know, some of this stuff is so minute, but like they decided that it would be a postponed general conference instead of a new one. Because if it was a new one, the international delegations would get more delegates and the U.S. delegates would get less. Why? Because 2,000 churches have left the UMC, 2,000 conservative churches left the UMC in the last 12 months. And so even that alone is going to give more delegates to the international folks. And so they just said, well, we're not changing the math. We're going to leave it the way that it is so that America is overrepresented in this vote coming into 2024. So there's all those kinds of things that lead me to be very confident. I walked away, I'm 18 and a half years into a 20-year vest on a pension. And I left now. But because at the end of the day, I was that certain that come 2024, I would be asked to do things or teach things which would make me uncomfortable to stand before the Lord and do.
Okay, but I don't think you've answered my question.
I'm sorry.
The GMC, though.
Yes.
Will it become more conservative that my gay friends will not be comfortable sitting by me in this church?
Thank you for reminding me the second part of that question.
That's my most important.
That's great. I don't know because I don't know your friend, and I don't know you, and I don't know these people. If your friend is comfortable sitting in here with you this Sunday, they're sitting in a denomination that says, we love you, you're of sacred worth. We believe that the practice of homosexuality is a sin. That's what our doctrines officially say. That's what they will say in the GMC. It is a grand irony, but nonetheless true. Methodist churches that want to stay who they've been have to leave to do that. So I would hope that it would be the case. I would hope that it would be the case, but I can't tell you that it will be because I don't know your friend. I don't know the people that sit around you on Sunday morning. And I would hope that you love them the same. Will the GMC continue? Will the GMC push further into conservative ways? I don't know. I don't think in my lifetime, my generation, that it will. I don't know what it will do in my son's. I know the leadership that is, looking at the next 20 years, people like me that are in leadership that have about 20 years to go. We're not homogenous. I shouldn't even say this because that opens a different kind of door, but I've voted none of the above in the last couple of presidential elections. I don't sit comfortably in political party. I mean, I'll just tell you. So it's not this monolith, right-wing, alt-right political group. It's just not. That's not the people that have led this. So I don't think in the first generation, but second generation, I mean, look at the Methodist movement from Wesley. My church is now in its fourth Methodist denomination. These things seem to go for a generation or two, and then, stuff comes up. So that's an honest answer. I have gay people in my church that feel very comfortable. I don't know if that, because when they're sick, we take them food. When they come to the altar, we kneel down and pray with them. But, frankly, I have adulterers in my congregation and people who are addicted to pornography. And just to be fair, frankly, spilling all this ink over what statisticians say is like 3% of the population is shameful when you consider the population that views online pornography. I won't make you raise your hand, but it's like 40% of you. Yeah.
Like, why is my sin's no greater, we all sin.
Yeah.
That's kind of my point.
Agreed. And I want you to hear that the people that I'm with in leadership in GMC, we recognize sin as sin. We love people, and we love them enough to say there's different and there's better and there's more. So if somebody comes in my office and says, I've got an addiction to pornography, I don't go, yeah, well, what are you gonna do? If somebody comes in and says, I'm committing adultery on my spouse, I don't say, well, I'll say this, I love you, but this is not the best for your life. When I have a couple come in, not long ago, it's like, I would think we're going to get divorced. And because it was hard, because they were arguing about dumb things like money, and I'm like, if you get a divorce, it is a sin. I just want you to hear that. I will love you both if you make that decision, and you can both stay here at this church, but I don't want it for you. And God doesn't want it for you because you are going to be hurt in the process deeply. It will be painful for you. And that's why God doesn't want it either, by the way. And so, that's the way I deal with it. I think that's the way most of my colleagues deal with it, is homosexuality passages in Bible aren't the ones that make me squirm, but there are some that make me squirm. And I don't want you to scissor them out of the pages just so that I'm more comfortable. I would rather you scissor the sin out of my life, because then I'll be healed. Does that make sense? All right. Yeah, sure. This is a great question. Thank you. Thank you for doing that. Yes, ma'am.
Hi. My question's a lot more boring.
Sick 'em bears. Yeah,
yes, sick
go
'em
ahead.
bears.
Sorry, we're having a Baylor moment over here. My wife was Bruiser for 3 years, by the way, the mascot at Baylor. But go ahead. Yeah, Baylor.
That's really cool.
Baylor royalty. Okay, go ahead.
My question's kind of boring compared to some of these other ones, but looking at the boards and those agencies, how will that individual who's over them be held accountable and selected?
Great question. Great question. There is a governing council of the Global Methodist Church called the Transitional Leadership Council. You can see who that is on the GMC's website, globalmethodist.org. And they selected Keith Boyette to be the initial connectional officer, and he is accountable back to them. That group includes pastors and lay people, women and men, and people from different nations. Great question. There's one back here. Raise your hand again, ma'am, so he can see you.
We're from Sterling City, and we have one church, the United Methodist Church. But I bring a question from a person who's not able to be here tonight. And a large portion of our disaffiliation cost has been labeled as unfunded pension liability.
Yeah.
Is the pension really unfunded? If not, how is that figure calculated and where does it go?
Wow, great question. Let me just nerd out on you here for a minute. When the gracious exit was written into the Book of Discipline, they were trying to figure out what would be a fair cost for exit of churches. Every annual conference funds the pension for their pastors in their annual conference area. It's all administered by Westpath. Westpath went to the authors and said, listen, when you write that in there, we need to make sure pension liability is dealt with. Some annual conferences, not very many anymore, but for a while there was a lot. But there still are a few who are unfunded. They have a deficit pension account. And what that means is they have to take income today to pay out today into a pastor's pocket for their retirement. That's what unfunded would mean. And there are some conferences that are in that deficit position. But what Westpath said was, we want you to calculate it on market liability. And pastors and lay people go, yeah, okay, fine, market liability, based on what the market's doing. I guess that's, that must be what they meant. What Westpath meant was, now that it's come up, what Westpath meant was, we want you to value the pension based on if a hedge fund was going to acquire this asset, how much money would need to be in it in order for it to be attractive for a hedge fund that wants to make money off of it. So that calculation was done. Westpath currently holds $30 billion in pension funds for 100,000 participants. They said a hedge fund that buys us would want to see at least a 10% overvaluation of this fund, so it's worth $30 billion. The unfunded market liability of our pension is $3 billion. Send it out to the annual conferences. This is your share. And so those shares were sent out. I can speak a little, Jim Noble sitting in front of you can speak better to this than I can for Rio, Texas, but I do know Rio, Texas does not have any actual unfunded liability, okay? So there's no actual unfunded liability. In our conference, the first number they gave us was like 20-something million. Was our share, and my church's share was almost $1 million just for my church. That's what they told us we would have to pay to get out. Now what we said was, look, my church is 173 years old. We've been paying apportionments for a long time. So if you're going to tell us that we have a share of the liability, then we get a share of all the assets too. You get both sides of the ledger. And so we ended up, it's a longer story, but we ended up prevailing in the argument with our conference that we had more in the asset column than even this pretend market liability, so they just canceled it out. We paid we paid the current year's apportionment that we were in, and that was it. So my exit cost went from $1.3 million to $263,000, which is my annual apportionment cost anyway. We're working on that in Rio, Texas, and the other thing that's happened is, I won't go into why it's the case, but based on our investments at Westpath, the value of the asset is heavily dependent on what interest rates are doing, and the more interest rates go up, the better our portfolio is doing. So like in Rio, Texas, I think we started at a $35 million valuation on conference. It's down to $12 million simply by movement in the interest rates. So whatever your local church's initial number was, it's significantly less than that now already. And we're working, praying that the conference might negotiate in good faith. But it gets squirrely. I mean, the Rio, Texas Annual Conference has $4.5 million in a designated fund that you paid into, your church has paid into, labeled pension reserve. Some of the leaders in your conference has asked, could we apply that against the pension liability since it's reserved for the purpose? And the answer is no. Well, why not? It's our money too. No. So some of that's still got to work out in the wash. And there are people who are pressing in on that. But I'm less confident in Rio, Texas as I was in Central Texas because I have an MBA and we did some forensic accounting. I was confident there was no actual liability. A guy named Dan Dalton, who is an attorney who specializes in denominational separation, ran actuarial tables that suggested that the average age of a participant in Westpath's program would have to extend to like 135. You'd have to live to be 135 before there was a pinch on the assets. Because the asset is enough, the $30+ billion that's in there, it's already enough that just in the interest income to meet the needs going out in most conferences, including this one. And that's without getting into the principal. But to me, there's a sinful thing here because we're Christians. Like, whatever I have reserved in Westpath, they shouldn't keep the principal after I'm gone. They should burn the principal in my lifetime and in my spouse's lifetime. But the way they're calculating exit costs, they're not. So it's been a very contentious issue. One of the things that Westpath did at our request, we forced their hand on it, was we said when pastors like Ryan Barnett, who have 18 and a half years of service invested, leave the United Methodist Church and you zero out our defined benefits and you put it into, I'm not losing any money. I'm losing money later. I'm not losing any money now. What my investment is worth, they put it into a fund and I can roll it out into a 403B investment. But what we said was, you no longer have liability for me. As hundreds and now thousands of pastors leave Westpath, that shrinks the amount of liability tail that you're calculating on. And they agreed, and they said, we'll give a $7,000 per year of service credit back to the annual conference against that liability for every pastor who leaves. Your annual conference won't recognize that, even though Westpath said it. We're working on it. We're working on it. What I say to churches is just this. If your pension is funded fully, which your conference officials have been saying for the last 10 years, up until 5 years ago, I was in the Rio, Texas conference. So for at least a decade, good news, we're fully funded. There's no liability on our pension. Every year at annual conference, the director of the Board of Pensions stands up and says that until it's time to leave. And now, here's another way you know it's not real. Do you know what happens to the money that you pay in the unfunded pension liability to the annual conference? They keep it. They do not send it to Westpath. Westpath is not getting any money. They put it in a designated account. And then you know what? They can redesignate it for any purpose that they want to. It's a great question. It's been one of the hard things to explain as we've gone around, but that's some true talk. It's a little oversimplified, so please know that, there's more detail, but that's the net result. From us, from you. What you put in the plate goes in the office. Westpath bills your church directly for the pension and health costs on your pastors.
My name's Laura Slaughter. I have more of a logistical question about the clergy deployment that you're talking about. I like the fact that we would have a say in that and that the clergy would have a say in that. But my question is, what if you have, especially in these more rural, like West Texas regions, where a clergy member is not willing to go? Is there any part of that process where they are guaranteeing that a clergyman will be placed there?
Yeah, great question and helpful. Sometimes I forget to say it. In the GMC, clergy are not guaranteed an appointment. Churches are guaranteed a pastor. So we are required to continue to search and find candidates to send out until a candidate is seated. We were really worried about it. I'm just going to be honest. We were a little worried about it. It hasn't been a problem to date. Now, we're brand new. But in East Texas, when they disaffiliated, they came out with almost 60 churches in need of appointment, a lot of them small rural. Hasn't yet been a problem. Part of that is just the way the system works. I hate to just keep comparison to death, but in the UMC, to get ordained a pastor, you have to say, I'll itinerate anywhere to any place. I remember candidates who would say things like, look, I really feel called to serve the small church. I wouldn't do good in the suburbs. I like wearing my boots and And it was like, well, then you can't be ordained because you got to be ready to serve anywhere in any situation. And that's just not the reality. The other thing is that the GMC does not require a Master of Divinity to be an elder in the denomination. So part of the reason sometimes pastors, I think, had a hard time going to smaller churches or rural churches is they're coming out of seminary with $50,000 worth of debt. And so that's no longer the case. So churches are guaranteed a pastor, or at least that the denomination can keep trying until they get one. I would say, depending on the size of some of the churches, it's not totally different than the UMC. Many churches have, had lay supply and other things to fill in while they were trying to find somebody that could do. So, got one way in the back. Thank you, Laura.
Megan Honeycutt. Megan Honeycutt.
Megan.
Hey, you actually served at university. My sister and her family go there, so.
Nice.
The question I had was, kind of goes back to what Fran was asking. I know that part of what I had read in the transitional book of discipline was about not possibly having to pay apportionments.
Yeah.
At the beginning, because some of the churches are going to have a large monetary outlay to leave the UMC. And that what she brought up was that if you don't pay your apportionments, you could be disaffiliated from the GMC. Is that true? What do y'all, but then the second to that is, what mechanism do you have in place to get those churches to, I guess, fall in line to getting back into place with paying their apportionments once that time period expires? I don't know if that makes sense.
No,
but,
it does.
yeah.
Great questions. Yeah. So first of all, there's this period of transition. We are very aware that there are churches who are having to pay huge ransoms to get out of the UMC, and there is a waiver available to any church coming out of the UMC that has had to pay beyond what that year's worth of apportionments were. So like, let's say it costs you, this church, the equivalent of 3 years worth of your current apportionments to get out of the UMC, to leave. You would file for a waiver with the GMC for the next 3 years, not to pay anything, or to pay some small thing just so that, to show, like, we're going to try and we're going to get there, but we've got to finish paying off this ransom note. So there is a waiver for that, for the transitional period in time. For the churches in Central Texas, we didn't have to do that because we didn't pay more than the 1 year that we were already in, so we start paying January 1. Now, I'll tell you what's extraordinary to me is we had about 80 churches join the GMC November 1st, and of them, even though they all had a waiver, I think 76 of them started paying apportionments to the GMC in November, even though they didn't have to start till January, because they wanted to, because they were excited, and because God was blessing them with the resources to do that. As far as being disaffiliated for not paying apportionments, kind of have to shift a mindset. It's been hard coming out of the UMC to shift a mindset, but the GMC is not interested in your property or your money. That's not why we want to be attached to churches. So there is absolutely redemptive process and grace, acknowledgement, understanding that churches struggle, they have hard years. If a church struggles in paying its apportionments, GMC's posture is, okay, let's work together. What kind of decisions need to be made in the local church so that you can get back to financial health? My guess is if you're not paying your apportionments, the apportionments are not the biggest part of the problem. There's deeper stuff that needs to be addressed and handled, and some, austerity measures that need to be put into place to right the ship. So, we would want to work with those churches. Now, if it's just that a church, hey, we just don't want to give y'all money, that's where it's not even disaffiliation. It's just, Okay, well, you don't have to be a part of the Global Methodist Church if you don't want to be. There's no process to leave the Global Methodist Church other than we'd like to leave the Global Methodist Church. And we say, God bless you, good luck. Can we bless you along the way? It's a totally different deal. But I'll tell you what it has done. I was on a call today with the 3 presidents of the 3 Texas Conference and the executive officers. And we keep reminding each other, the work we're doing has to be of value to the local churches or they just won't be in this thing. So every decision has to be based on that churches would want to be a part, would want that because it enriches, it helps, stands in the gap for them. So to your point, if First San Angelo didn't pay their apportionments during transition, they would just file for the waiver for it, and it would be granted based on those circumstances. If 10 years down the road, First San Angelo's hits a problem, something's going on, they would notify GMC, say, okay, well, let's work together. What do we need to do? How long do we think this is going to be an issue? We need a couple of years. Okay, let's put ourselves on a plan to get the ship righted. But, it's such a streamlined... Our goal has been to build the least amount of structure necessary to accomplish the things that a local church can't do for themselves. Provide accountability over clergy, training for pastors, deployment of pastors to different areas, some child use safety standards for protection, some of that, and then to provide some resources. But everybody in the GMC so far, they don't pay me anything. None of the presiding elders are getting paid. They don't even get a stipend. They don't even get reimbursement for mileage for driving around the churches. But of course, they're not driving 700 miles between their churches because their churches are the 5 or 10 closest to them. Imagine that. They all know each other. They shop at the same Walmart. They're in community together. So, but even still, I want to point that out. It truly is, it's a movement. Personally, I've spent my ministry career in an institution, and for the first time, I'm in a movement, and it's just different, the way people approach it, the way they pitch in, and the way they go. Sorry, now it starts like a recruitment speech. I'm sorry. Again, maybe we can wrap up unless somebody's got a question. Go ahead. Yes, sir.
Ryan?
Yes, sir.
My name is Kurt.
Can you hold the microphone up?
I'm sorry.
That's right.
Ryan, my name is Kurt Eschman.
Hi, Kurt.
What is GMC uniquely doing better than the UMC to prevent a split happening to GMC in the future?
Oh, man. I think I think we do accountability better. Accountability is not something that gets applied when there's a problem, but it is an ongoing work. And so, again, it's hard to underestimate. The only time, for the most part, until Leah Hitty-Gregory was my superintendent, the only time I really got a call from superintendent was when I screwed up. So the way it is now, you meet weekly with your presiding elder, and they ask you, what is the status of your soul? What is your last known sin? Who are you evangelizing? Who are you discipling? Who are you shepherding? How are things going in your local context? What's happening in your church? What ministries are you growing? What are you worried about? These kinds of things. So it definitely creates a lot more guardrails for keeping everybody moving in the same direction before they get up a full head of steam in the wrong direction. I think the fact that there's no guaranteed appointment is better. If you have guaranteed appointment, you really can teach and say and do whatever you want. And you may move to churches with smaller and smaller salaries, but you will be guaranteed a very nice living. I think that's better. Bishops having term limits, I think that provides better. But to get to the end of the question, I don't know that you prevent a split in a denomination, because people are in denominations. You know, you can do better. You know, my guess is that the GMC will not end or split over anything that I would think about today, because I'm building systems to defend against it. But it will be something else that my son's kids are like, man, I wish they would have done this differently, because it would have prevented this. But we can't see it right now, so I don't know what it is. I hope it goes till Jesus comes again, and that's very likely if he'll hurry up. But until he comes back, and as long as people are involved, denominations are going to run into trouble. And ours will too. It will. Thank you, though, Kurt. I appreciate that. Yeah. Before the piano plays me off, let me again just say how much I appreciate the invitation and the opportunity to be here. If anything I said is wrong or painful for you, please don't hold it against your pastor. And
you already told him to go on my Facebook and see what I was doing.
Well, yeah, you should do that. I never understand when people come in for an interview and I'm like, well, tell me about this. And they're like, how do you know about that? I'm like, you put it on the internet. I want to end this the way I began, though, saying this and hopefully praying. But I'm not here to recruit this church to the GMC. I really am not. I hope I was able to provide helpful information and for you to get a feel of what the executive leadership of the GMC in Texas is all about. If it is the right spirit, the right chord, the right theology, the right understanding of the person of Jesus, come on with us. We're excited. And if it's not, invite me back again. I'll come back to a UMC. I mean, not to talk to you, but just to worship with you and to sing hymns and partner with you when
to preach. He's a great preacher.
When there's a flood, I'll come and make buckets with you. We'll make them together. If you're UMC and I'm GMC, I'm serious. I mean, it's okay. I have dear friends that will stay in the UMC, and I love them. And we have some differences. Doesn't mean I don't love them. If I had to love everybody I disagreed with, I wouldn't have anybody left in my family. So anyway, thank you for letting me come. I really appreciate the time. You have a beautiful church, and I would love to come preach in this sanctuary sometime. This is like preacher's dream right here, especially this good congregation. So God bless you. Thank you.
Yes, amen.
Yeah.
I want us to end by praying over Ryan. We offered him a motel room, and most of the time I've known him when he was in our conference, he did not have a son. And so he told me, no, Fridays are donuts with Dad. And so he's about to embark back to Waco. So would you extend a hand? Because we're going to pray over Ryan. Gracious Heavenly Father, we thank you for Ryan's ministry and leadership, and we thank you for his heart tonight and being with us. We actually pray a hedge of protection around him. Thank you, Lord, for the work that he's doing, and whether we're UMC or GMC or whatever we end up, Lord, together we can have the right heart together. We ask your blessing on Ryan and his Kim and family, and Lord, bless Donuts with Dad tomorrow. In Jesus' mighty name, amen.
It's good to see you. You have a beautiful church.
Yeah, good people too.